Hey everybody, welcome to this issue of Staffing Monthly, where we are teeing up our Q4 planning. And one of the main areas that we have to be thinking about in this industry is technology and automations. And I know that you're going to hear the term automation and AI, just like you've heard all year long. And we've had a major structural shift in our industry where we've gone from having very limited options or very fixed options with technology that might not have had functionality to fully support the human process of staffing, to now too many options. And a lot of times it will make your head spin and you don't even know where to begin. What should you be looking at for tech? What should you automate? What should you not automate? What's going to provide value? What's not? It is really confusing. And as we get into the season of strategic planning for next year, if you don't figure your tech out, you will fall behind. That's how important this is to listen right now. And I've actually brought in somebody that is the go-to in the industry for understanding tech stack, tech automations, and really how do you optimize your human process with technology in that flow. And this is somebody that has been in the industry for nearly a decade, but as soon as he got in the industry, he rose to the ranks of some of the major companies out there, sending the highest levels of VP. And then he said, you know what, I'm going to actually build my own company. He's exited from multiple staffing companies. He's actually built staffing platforms. And all along the way, people have taken notice of this guy. And they said, man, like, you've got the technology figured out. Can you help us do that? And he got enough of that to where in 2020, he started Oak City Advisors to really just do that, to work with companies in the staffing industry to help them understand their technology and implement it and get it working for them, which is the key step that most partners they overlook. And then he's also serves on the board of directors for multiple partners in the industry, like Staffing Referrals and Time Rack. So he's a sought-out advisor in this industry, and there's literally nobody better that I could be talking to today about this very important topic. So I want to introduce you to the Chief Vision Officer of Staffing A to Z and an owner of Oak City Advisors LLC, Dan Mastropolo. Dan, thanks for being here, man. I've enjoyed getting to know you, and I'm glad to pick your brain today.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. And feelings mutual. It's been great spending some time with you one-on-one, and just really excited about this topic today. I mean, it's definitely my wheelhouse, and we spent a lot of time really trying to help navigate this with staffing owners, and just so different when everybody navigates what they're trying to accomplish. But it is, I'm with you. It's become very, very saturated, and you hear from a lot of CEOs today in the industry. They get pitched something new multiple times a day. It's overwhelming, like they really just struggle making, the decision and really trying to navigate it. And, it's definitely something that's warranted to be talked about today, for sure.
Yeah, and I see it, like, having been in the game, almost 2 decades here, I've seen it where you had very few tech options, mainly the ATS, that could do some things. And now, and like an industry that just, we never really adopted tech. Like, we were always very like, no, we don't want to automate. We don't want to, no, it's a human business, human to human business. And now we're adopting it at crazy rates, and it's getting dysfunctional with our tech stacks, and our automations are not working the way they're supposed to. Nothing, I shouldn't say nothing. A lot of things aren't doing what the salesperson said they were supposed to do. So
Yeah.
how do we make sense of it? So let's just take a 10,000 foot view. Overall, like, how should staffing owners, leaders be approaching technology fundamentally?
Yeah. No, I think it's a couple of really key points there, right? And so back in the day, most of us, just relied on our ATS, or what we kind of call the ERP. And those are always really good starting points, right? And you get a lot of bells and whistles in the tech itself, right? And there's a lot of UI, UX, that goes into those systems that try to help, whether it be a full desk or split desk recruiting, type situation, just to aid the recruiters, the salespeople, and try to really help, kind of manage day to day. However, what I find to be really challenging is, what's really expanded has been the marketplaces of those systems, right?
Yeah.
So, what used to be maybe, a WOTC partner or an onboarding partner or some type of tech stack or some integrations, the job board has now expanded right into, mobile apps and onboarding and AI and all these things, that politely, in my opinion, have become shiny object words in our ecosystem. That all sound well and good. However, it can be where, if you're not comfortable with it and you're just basically saying yes to it all, it becomes really, really cumbersome if you don't really understand the mechanics of what's happening behind all those systems. So I'm still personally to this day, I live off the Maurice Fuller staffing tech figure eight diagram, right? Like it is to me one of the best diagrams for a staffing owner to look at and truly understand what the tech ecosystem of a staffing company should look like and just the life cycle of what we go through. So I spend a lot of time with my clients, just trying to educate them because from my lens, it's really one of the main areas owners have not been coached or trained or really other than be fed a bunch of information and demos and things of that nature, right? Most of them have not learned how to manage a CTO, hired a CTO, hired a dev resource, hired some type of system admin. It's one of the least hired positions in our industry. So you
Yeah.
end up with a lot of senior level leadership that are saying these things because they want to optimize the business, but then they go, well, it's just supposed to work, but way I got sold it, right? And then when it's these product to product integrations, there's very few diagrams that actually explain what the product to product integrations are supposed to do. So you end up in this world, in my opinion, of just misalignment from day one because the owner sitting here saying, well, this is supposed to help, 3 to 5x my business, and it's not. And then we have it all, and now we're still struggling with adoption. So it becomes really, really challenging. And I feel for a lot of our CEOs because no offense, it shouldn't really even be them that should be managing these things, right? So it's tough, but
Yeah.
I think that diagram for me really helps kind of articulate what your front office should do, what your CRM should do, what the mid office should do, and then the more that they get educated to that, it gets a little bit easier to identify how and where those things can be adopted.
So I love that, and we'll get a link to that document for anyone that's unfamiliar with Maurice Fuller's figure eight. It really is a great framework. It's foundational, and something you said there kind of I guess hit a chord with me about how the least hired position is that CTO or is that technological expert in the organization. And I feel like it's because we were unprepared. We had never been considered a technological industry. And then all of a sudden the floodgates opened and we were unprepared to navigate it. And I think people are just trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like it's a lot of like, it should work out of the box, like that is the promise. Like these salespeople for all these software tools and functions, like a lot of them are really good, right? And they
Yeah.
can paint that blue sky picture. But when you're thinking about let's move past the ATS, like that's table
Sure.
stakes. When you're thinking about this figure eight diagram, what do you think is the first thing that a staffing leader should be looking at outside of hiring a CTO, right? Like what is the
Yeah.
first piece of technology or automation that would make their life easier, in your opinion?
Yeah. No, another good question. I'm gonna say this probably a little bit different than most, but my brain personally in this world always starts in back office. And the reason I say that is, in most staffing situations, we have really two main jobs, right? One is to get the dang orders, right, in the
Yeah.
door first. The second is to fill them. But if we don't manage mid and back office well, you can lose that business very, very quickly. Right. So outside of just that, closing the marketplace of jobs and candidates and making it easier for that to, fill, you have to manage the pay bill. And to me, there's still a lot of fragmentation in our industry, right? Like whether you're utilizing vendor management tools or, just the fact that clocks don't really have great policy rule engines, it always equates to us ending with a lot of people in the mid back office, whether they're aggregating data or just having manual processes to move time from one system to another. So for me, typically with those things always equate erosion for us in the margin because we're typically human capital heavy. And so having automations or having and taking time to think about where you're trying to get that data to land always gives you a path backwards to really help with configuration of making it easier to manage the pay bill piece. So I spend a lot of time there personally.
That's super interesting, and I know that you've dabbled in the CFO hat too, so it makes sense that
Mm-hmm.
maybe you're there and well versed. But I'm gonna pose a contrarian viewpoint to that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like building it around the back office function, which I will say, the fact that you mentioned it first, there's a lot of unsung heroes out there that are going to be showing you some love on that one for sure.
For sure.
They don't ever get the love that they deserve.
They
Um,
don't.
But do you feel that building it around that function is sort of like the tail wagging the dog? Like, do you think that it's going to create some upstream constraints in what the CRM does or how the ATS functions for like recruiting workflows at all?
No, I personally don't. And I'll give you kind of some examples of
Yeah.
some things, right? Typically what ends up happening, especially in what I'll call the product to product mix, right? To our earlier point, we always buy typically the ATS or ERP first. When once that decision is made, right? Typically, let's just stay front office. You're putting typically a lot of the bells and whistles in the front office, right? It's
Yeah.
mostly there for the recruiters, it's there for your front of office staff. But what ends up happening a lot of times is companies start moving and they don't keep up with the order management in what I call the mid office, right? It's the pay bill. So typically with that, what ends up happening? You just end up with a bunch of poor data. And typically agencies that from what I see, they don't necessarily hold those teams accountable to going back and making sure that those things stay clean. So how many times, I know you probably see it, how many times do you go into a back office, you have 100 people on payroll, but there's 700 timesheets sitting in the back because nobody actually architected or keeps up with that. So coming and tying that back to front office, just right, that normally equals people that look unavailable that are because you didn't close the orders, right? You end up with a lot of these other automations, but you tend to be missing some of the talent pools that are already existing. So what does that also equal? It typically equals people continuing to spend in job board spend and neglecting the database that's already been converted. So for me, there's a big education when you start going to people going, hey, you're spending 4,000, 5,000 a month in net new. You have a talent population of X, and we're basically already have either spent money, have people working, where typically that employee gets less expensive because of the fact that I have Pseudomaxes and WotC and all the things that actually come back to us that actually equal profitability. And so for me, if you're not managing those things, the automations become really difficult because you have very little control of understanding what are you missing, how are you auditing that, right? How are you getting to those populations that actually equal easier paths of billing? And so, once again, for me, in my opinion, it's neglected. Nobody really spends a lot of time talking about these things, but they're instrumental in being able to truly continue to build the talent pools and be able to keep a system clean, which really equals easier automations, right? Because how many times do we see automations go out? You didn't take care of the data. Then all of a sudden you have a poor brand awareness, behind that because
Yeah.
people are getting pissed that you're, essentially marketing to them for things that may or may not be relevant to them.
Yeah.
So that's to me where, I see a lot of misses, a lot of opportunity, but it's also just never really talked about because most people are talking about candidate attraction, engagement, redeployment, all those things. They're important. I'm not saying they're not important,
Right.
but typically, if you're not managing and keeping the system accurate to those things, you're losing value. And then potentially what I call it is it equals tech debt, right? You adopt these things and it's not just financial debt, it's just pure debt and burden on the day to day because you spend more time having to triage, those types of situations that could have been avoided had you just proactively managed it.
So that makes a ton of sense. And I think there's two things I want to dig into there. The first one is how you mentioned if you don't take care of the order management, the people, the payroll process, like all those things speak to employee and client experience, which truly that is the value that you're providing. That's the promise that you give on the front end where they sign on the dotted line. And then if you don't fulfill that, you're not keeping your promises and you lose that brand equity. I think that's really I think it's really astute of you to point that piece out that that's where it lives. Yet we over prioritize the getting in the candidate attraction because we think that's going to solve our problems. But what's interesting, as I'm kind of thinking about in my mind as you say that, is if we always focus on that stuff, not that it's not important, but if we over prioritize it, we're kind of over prioritizing the commoditization of our business, right? Like it's like
100.
that's the kind of stuff that our clients can actually do themselves, if they really wanted to. But the client experience, the candidate experience, like that's the stuff that we have to excel to set us apart. So, which leads me to the second thing I wanted to dig into is that you mentioned this thing like we always focus on candidate attraction and the net new people coming in the database, and we underutilize what's already there. And I see that as probably one of the biggest plagues of our industry. And
Yep.
the value we really provide is the passive network of talent that resides in the ATS, the table stakes software that we adopted years ago, right? It lives there, but we don't use it to our advantage. How do you get companies? Have you seen people, I mean, in your purview, have you seen people that truly implemented technology and they moved away from overspending on job boards to really pull the money out of the database? And how do they do that?
Yeah. No, definitely. So that's actually one of the biggest staples of what Oak City, I think, honestly, we pride ourselves on. In a very, very simple form, what we do is we help a lot of these, like what I'll call mid-size and enterprise-size companies, start to adopt, their own server architecture versus staying in the product-to-product mix. And a big reason for it is, typically in a product-to-product type situation, you have to pull a bunch of reports. You have to basically really try to understand what reports are going to equal, analysis and, being able to see data integrity of the system to be able to even dictate projects that help with that, right? So by moving to a cloud, server architecture and backing these things up, what we help companies do is really create that mainstream data lake from multiple sources of record, so that way we can blend data and actually get visibility, to where the architecture and the integrity of data could be off. All right. And by basically optimizing that, bringing those things in, it's helping companies quite a bit, understand the value of the data that they have and being, kind of more in this proactive data management situation than, the retroactive, ness of what our industry typically is, right? Most people don't go to pull the data until they have a problem, right? Like when something happens, it triggers it, right? They have to go now do some type of analysis. But how many companies do you personally know? I know you're involved a lot, right? That they pull the same report 900 times. They try to table it in a Teams or SharePoint, type situation, then connect it to a BI, then try to actually get some analysis. And once again, going back to the original point, most people have not hired the sysadmin or the project administrator to even know how to use a BI the way that you can on the powerful scale of it, right? So that's where, for us, we come in, we help organize those things, but they are the staples because like I live by the core value. I will not take you through automation until I know that we have good architecture to support, right? Like if it's just going back to that earlier point, if you're not keeping up with it, right, it's just going to cause more harm than good, typically if you can't manage to it. So, those things for us have become really kind of, I think, bread and butter understanding of what Oak City does, how we do those things. But I have like two different situations. I'll use shift fillers directly. We were in a situation where our background check cost was absurd for the size agency that we are, right? We were spending close to 20, 30,000 a month. We have about 400, 500 people on assignment. We hire typically about 400, 500 a month, right? But the process typically is, we're spending about $4,000, give or take, on job board spend, 1,000+ candidates, a week that come in. We're processing all high volume, right? So we are going through this whole process. And I bring you in, we hire you, we now take you through background. Maybe I have an issue in background. Maybe I have an issue in I-9, right? Those things happen.
Yeah.
But it was ridiculous. I mean, we hired 10 to 1, right? So every 10 people, one person gets to a seat. Well, those were pure processes for us. We just typically, we funnel, we hire, we background, you go, right? And like typically most of us go through it. The problem was, we were not proactively managing that front piece of when exactly the right time was for us to do it. So, we noticed, that compliance and identity are a pretty big deal, and especially the commercial side.
Yeah.
So very quickly, we adapted a process where now we do a little bit more of an identity proofing off of a conditional offer to control more of that spend. But in a very short period of time, we went from about a $20,000+ cost to about $6,000, right? That's a big number overall, just because of the fact that we saw patterns in the data of where we had those problems, where those things typically were being overspent, and we're able to make some really big decisions to control that. But that, you get the idea. I mean, it's a small scale kind of example, but those things happen. And a lot of it came with, just understanding, how we are using those people, where we're putting them through that workflow. And a small change like that made a really big net income difference
Yeah,
quick.
you basically looked, and it's not that you weren't, you said we're going to stop doing background checks. We're just going to do them in a different part in the process where it's actually going to be more meaningful and save the company 140, 170 grand a year.
Exactly.
Which I don't know if any of our viewers out there, if you'd like to have an extra 140 to 170 grand a year in your pocket, maybe think about that. And I love that example because a lot of times we get so caught up with just thinking we have to do background checks. We got to just, that's our QC, but you can shift, you can decide when to do it. And if there's a more meaningful time, like you probably pulled together a Kaizen or a project. It's like, hey, let's look at this and when does it need to be done? And that's a meaningful outcome, and
It's a huge outcome.
how did you train to it? So did you automate that? So like there's something in the system that
Mhm.
flags like, hey, this is the time, and then automatically sends the background screening requirements to the
Yeah,
employee.
we actually found an identity proofing partner that we work with, that basically, we have an automation. So once somebody gets nominated basically on the job, which is basically our equal to conditional offer, we send out a custom message, and it basically said, hey, congrats on the conditional offer. We now need to understand you are who you say you are. They upload document. We get basically a true false, so basically really looking to make sure there's not a photo overlay or misinformation or documents are issued within the same time period. As long as those come true, we continue to progress into onboarding. If we comes false, our compliance and HR teams get involved, which essentially then give us a more human approach, to make sure we're not making mistakes or not doing anything that we shouldn't be doing. But it's a big deal, right? Like, I mean, right now, we've had a compliance problem where we're getting good IDs, they pass C-verify, they're still not the people that they say they are all the time, right? And so that's a rising issue across the industry, right? And so, the deal. It's the same type of thing. When people get really good at fraud, it gets duplicated and just kind of starts becoming patterns. So I just, we took a more of an approach. It's really hard for a human, right, to just keep using an ID me guide that's been there for 20 years and everybody do the exact same thing the exact same way. So it was an easier area of automations for us to get a programmatic approach and have just a little bit more confidence in what we send to onboarding and try to drop some of the waste. But it's been really powerful, to be honest. That's a small case study of something we've improved quite a bit in the last couple of months.
I love that. I love that. And I could talk to you for hours, but I won't
Yeah.
monopolize all your time. There's one question that I want to ask that just this conversation has spurred in me that I feel like is another area that's underutilized in our industry, is redeployment. And I feel like we spend so much money on the front end getting new talent in. And if I had a sense, I feel like most of our placements are people that we just put in the database within the last 30, 60 days. And we're not really paying attention to redeployment. Are you seeing the same issue? And do you have any maybe case studies like that last one to show how
Yeah.
companies are really doing redeployment the right way and kind of decreasing their job board costs?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll use a couple different ones, but uh, definitely redeployment to me is one of the top three areas I see companies just with waste, right? Like they're overspending in the top of the funnel every time their recruiters are coming to them saying, "Hey, I need something more. I need more," and it's whether it's a new tool, a new attraction, this, that, or the other. But it's really a really big piece of the P&L that should be evaluated. But
Yeah.
where I really see kind of the two main trends of companies that are doing it well, like there's no neglecting the fact that direct sourcing has become a major piece of the total talent ecosystem for enterprise clients and even mid-size. But let's just be real. Most people maybe not even know what direct sourcing is. Direct sourcing is basically selling an engaged talent, community, to an end client. So, you
Yeah.
get some technology, you get high engagement, you're getting a reduction in markup, to the traditional markup, but really they sell it as a more engaged proprietary talent community. But that basically lives in nurturing, right, and basically keeping a community engaged to be redeployed over and over and over again, right? So there are definitely companies like Raise, who is our parent company. They're in a V3 of that, and you see them all the time. They're getting a much better cost per unit because of the fact that they're using a person here, Simon ends, and they can redeploy it through the talent community into other areas or facets of the business. It also helps a ton with the upskilling, right, gap that we have. Um, The other one that I'll say is I have a handful of consulting clients that are doing a lot of re-engagement with Sense right now, right? So Sense has really easy automations, that you can tack, activity measures in the ATS. So, for us personally, we use, if you have no activity within 60 days, you get a quick note, through our bot, that essentially says, hey, it's been a little bit, are you still interested? Or, once a month they get a quick, re-engagement email of here's our top jobs, that are essentially relevant to them. But those things really do help. You can see a lot of those redeploys. Personally, the other side, we use staffing referrals. Staffing referrals for us also is a really big tool for us to be able to get redeployment engagement from, because we're repinging people to bring people like that, personal people back into the network. And it's not surprising, right? The more you leverage your referrals, the more that you become kind of a community of referrals, you tend to see their longer life cycle of assignment or a higher redeploy, because you have more of that peer-to-peer culture within the business. So, I can definitely say people that use those in tandem are ones that I'm seeing much higher on the trajectory, and the redeploys of, 26 to 35% on average. But you know the idea. That's a good throttle that, if I can basically do an exercise like that where I'm actually going through redeploy first, pinging the database, and then basically, and incentivizing people to bring people to me, I will take referrals and those types of things over net new job spend all day, every day. Because two things, not just is it a better fit, but also it's a lower cost. And I tend to get a higher quality, right? Because they're not active job seekers. We're not typically at the little bit of the bottom of the barrel of the candidate population. It's getting me more passive job seekers and more people that actually want to come represent a brand than just a job seeker that's applying to a job.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that you just make there, is that when you have that database, like you literally have the elusive passive candidate at your disposal. And when you actually leverage on engaging that audience and building that tribe, and then you focus on the referrals, that again, the data is strong to suggest it's a better quality candidate. It's more likely to place quicker, it's more likely to last longer, it's more likely to refer other good quality people, the birds of a feather concept. So
Yeah.
those are definitely two areas that I think the data supports, is where you will get a lower cost to acquire the talent and a higher lifetime value of the talent. And long term, that's a winning strategy in any business, but especially
Oh,
ours.
100. I mean, and like I said, for the viewers that don't understand it, right? Like if we keep somebody on assignment for a long period of time, right? We max SUTA, that person gets cheaper. We tend to be able to get a higher profitability off of that person, right? So, it's if even if companies don't adopt it today, they should like start pulling SUI reports, right? Like that was a call list for us. And like it's an easy way to start adopting to redeploy, just by understanding how close people are to those numbers, right? So that was, going back to my Randstad days, that was pretty much a staple every Monday morning. Pull the SUI report. That was half our availability list, and that helped a ton.
I love that. And that's just another area where owners and leaders can look at driving costs down, increasing margins without having to rely on markups, right? Like that's the, in our game, we always focus on the three levers of gross margin, which is markups, SUTA, or workers' comp,
Yeah,
and SUTA and workers' comp, we've got the most influence over, right?
a
We
hundred.
can, we can control those things, we control who deploy, but if you're not looking at that data and you don't approach it strategically like that, you're literally leaving margin dollars on the table. So
Yep.
I love that. I love that. Dan, man, like I said, I could talk to you for hours, and at some point in the future, I'm sure we'll have you back talking about strategy and strategic planning. I thank you for your time, man. I know you're a
Yeah.
busy guy. I'm grateful for it. If anyone wants to follow up with you, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, they can definitely just reach me on LinkedIn, send me a message, and or they can go to my website, Oak City Advisors LLC.com. There's also links to connect with us there.
Awesome. I appreciate you, my friend. Have an amazing day.
Yeah, you too.